In this lesson, we will examine probabilities that involve the word OR. We'll begin by answering this reasonably simple question in order to introduce a general formula to apply to similar questions. Now, in this question, we are selecting one number from a set of numbers, and we want to find the probability that the selected number is either odd or prime. Now, please note that unless told otherwise, we must always assume that the word OR is inclusive. This means that if we are examining the probability that event A or event B occurs, we must consider the outcomes where event A occurs, outcomes where event B occurs, and outcomes where both events occur. Now, for OR questions, it will often be useful to identify the individual events involved. So for this question, we'll say that event A is the event that the selected number is odd, and event B is the event that the selected number is prime. We want to find the probability that event A or event B occurs. To solve this question, we'll use the probability formula. Later, we'll solve the same question using a new formula. Now, when we use the probability formula, we see that we need to find the total number of outcomes where events A or B occur, and we need to find the total number of outcomes. We'll begin with the denominator. Since our set contains 7 numbers, there are 7 possible outcomes. Now the numerator. How many outcomes are either odd or prime? Well, 5 of the outcomes are either odd or prime, so the numerator is 5, which means the probability is 5/7 that the selected number will be either odd or prime. Now let's examine a second way to solve this question. To do this, we'll introduce a new formula that can be used with probability questions involving the word OR. Here we see that the probability that event A or event B occurs is equal to the probability that event A occurs plus the probability that event B occurs minus the probability that events A and B both occur. Let's use this formula to solve our question. To do so, we'll need to determine the probability that event A occurs, the probability that event B occurs, and the probability that event A and B occur together. Now, event A is selecting an odd number. Since 4 of the 7 numbers are odd, the probability of event A is 4/7. Event B is selecting a prime number. Since 3 of the 7 numbers are prime, the probability of event B is 3/7. Finally, events A and B together. Since 2 of the 7 numbers are both odd and prime, the probability the events A and B occur together is 2/7. We can now calculate the probability of event A or event B occurring by plugging our information into the formula to get 5/7. Now, admittedly, this solution is actually slower than the first solution. However, the consequences of the new formula are important to note. Up to this point, we were relying on the probability formula that required us to count individual outcomes. This new formula allows us to use a different strategy when tackling probability questions, because with this formula, we can find some probabilities without counting individual outcomes. In the next lesson, we'll examine a question that illustrates this. Now, before ending the lesson, I want to point out a certain aspect of this formula. It has to do with this part here, the probability that events A and B occur together. If you recall from the last lesson, we learned that if events A and B are mutually exclusive, then those two events cannot occur together. And if events A and B cannot occur together, then the probability that both occur must equal 0. So if events A and B are mutually exclusive, this part of our formula will equal 0 and essentially disappears. This fact yields 2 conclusions. First, if events A and B are mutually exclusive, the following formula applies. Second, if events A and B are not mutually exclusive, then this formula applies. Having said that, this one formula can be used for all questions involving the word OR. Just remember that sometimes this part will equal 0, and sometimes it will not equal 0. In the next lesson, you will see a useful application of our new formula.